Start with red. The red curtains in my mother's house looked like blood dripping down the windows. The red ticker on my mother's forehead looked like someone had shot her. When I first wore red lipstick smacked across my face, she said it was inappropriate for a girl of 6. Wash it off, she said. When I first wore that red silk skirt, it mesmerised me by the way it moved around my legs. It made you smile at me. Now your face is red. Too much sun, too much beer, too much butter. I tell you not to wear that red shirt this month. There's blood in the bathroom again. Now I'll read a poem which is in my first collection, Flood, and it's called The Jezebel Spirit. I'll build a swimming pool on the moon and fill it full of rocket fuel. I'll burn inside my breaststrokes while breathing fire each afternoon. I'll build a potting shed with roses climbing through black holes. I'll mend windows in my luxury lunar home, learn how to wire in the electrics, plug in loudspeakers, and boom out celestial music. But I'm nowhere near the orbit, light years from midnight stars, with no spacecraft or screwdrivers, only pockets full of flat batteries, a crooked sixpence someone flung at me, an absinthe spoon and sugar cubes. I can't reach myself with these implements, only pull out my guts and abandon them. I've lost the spit of my loneliness, stuffed them into acorns and buried them. In a thrust of soil, I want to sleep inside a grave made of flowers gathered by a bowerbird. I want to quiet the engines I'm made of and become the exhale of a planet. I want to see a loud beauty in the thrall of trees and melt into air that can't be breathed by people who are not there and disappear into the bright furnace that exists inside the big sky. And this poem I wanted to read. I don't read this poem very often, but I sort of had, I don't know, it's tough, isn't it, lockdown? And I just had enough this afternoon and went and off and drove to the sea and just to look at it. So this is a poem called Seaborn. A mountain of grey blood crashes into my bones. A hard glut goes wandering into shells of everything. Can you still see it? It avalanches through tunnels made of itself, turns into the sky and eats with blistering white teeth. I can still hear it. My father told me it destroyed everything. In time, turns us into sand. He told me my blood had the same mist as its own creatures. Asked me, can you still smell it? My father told me it seeped into the house. It travels, sears like a hung-neck bird into scarping churn, promises a quench of death as it pours from my legs and roars. Can you still hear it? This poem is inspired by how I felt as a child. there's not one specific memory in it, but it's very much a sort of a feeling of the adults were lying to me somehow. And it's called The Liar. I never believed in Father Christmas as I crawled out of the chimney, soot-stained, ingrained dust in the whorls of my skin. I never feared the dark, crawled under my bed, talking to dust, moulding it into imaginary friends. We sang together to the soil. Suspicious of prayers to invisible gods, I stared at vicars and asked them who would go to hell, whether they worshipped thunder. I found runes in churches, muttered spells in graveyards, climbed into yew trees, licking insects from bark. I saw adults spin, catching flies, never saw bogeymen lurking in woods or under bridges. I crawled from moss-damp ponds, dripping with slime. No one believed me when I told them where I went at night, under those trees, inside badger holes, curled up with fox cubs. Teachers and parents told me to tell the truth, scrubbed the earth from under my nails with wire, called me a liar, washed my mouth with soap. And now I'll read a poem about sort of first loves. And, you know, when you first sort of have these kind of very early boyfriends or girlfriends, and what that sort of feels like. So this is a poem from the pamphlet that's coming out next year with Broken Sleep Books. This is called Sidekick. We graduated from potato guns to plastic Lugers. You were always the hero. You can be the hero's girlfriend, you said, and gave me the rubbish gun. You said you were Logan 5, and I had to be Jessica 6. We graduated to kissing in playing fields. You took me by surprise that summer. We found punk records we liked in HMV. Why won't you let me kiss your lips? You kept saying. I didn't know the answer. The feel of you on my neck was enough. You yelled into the sea that summer, got your armour all wet. You climbed out of the waves, dripping with salt water. I was on the rocks, pretending to smoke. You slipped in some seaweed as I shot you with that cap gun between the eyes. You said I was mental, a freak wave of nature. I said you were a one-hit wonder. And now a bit of a later love from the same collection that's out next year, and also very gratefully published in Molly Bloom. So this is The Portent, and sort of turning someone into a comet. The Portent. One day he takes everything down, his beads and bangles, takes his face off, says nothing exists but you as he sits in the moon's rays and waits for the records to flip. One day, she expects Comet West to appear from far north, shining and wild-eyed, ready for the morning's electric blue sky. One day, she stays up all night to watch his dazzle, tailspin, coma. She sees him outgas, surpass himself as he unbuckles, falls through the leaves, flies to the horizon. Somewhere from a basement, he plays a guitar of rock dust, light pressure, water ice. From Earth, her eyes From earth her eyes dart from side to side to follow his blaze. He doesn't see her going cold. Chart a course. Find a map of space to point out where he goes, all crazed on the radio waves. One day, she makes sense of his punch-drunk songs as he flies too near the sun. One day, she might predict his return, burnt out in a shower of meteorites. One day, she'll take everything down, her naked eyes and records. Sorry about the phone. This is a really new poem that I've written, so I'm trying it out on you. It's inspired by a Liechtenstein picture of the crying girl. If you can imagine that, but hopefully it'll stand alone too. It's called, Is the Universe an Animal? I'm covered in blind spots, feeling cheetah, mascara running at 60 miles per hour. He thinks, I think, I'm thinking about him. Ignore me, I'm a cartoon girl with a bubble saying, oh, Brad. Ignore me. The lengths I'll go to keep a roof over my head. This skylight lets in water, all the stars, my blind spots. I'm a glittering blanket. I'm not thinking about Brad. I do not care for him. They think I'm attention-seeking. I dreamt I shot holes into my own body at close range. What's a girl to do to get a date? And this is a poem again in my first collection. And this is called The Angel. He wears a strong coat of wood pulp and bark. A veneer polished shines when waxed. When bathed and clean, in a certain light, he shines like a pigeon or a magpie glimmer. He wears a long coat to hide behind. He won't show his broken wings, his wounds like panic and hell fright are gripped tight over broken bodies at night. He mutters and mumbles in his sleep, so low I can barely hear. He says prayers for the poor, the cracked and littered under floorboards, spiders, the smell of mud and police stations. For those lost behind doors. Perhaps I passed him on the street once. Perhaps he thought it was me screaming like a cat in darkness, but we both know it was him, alone, made of the devil, holding on to a lifeboat made of his body, covered in leaves and feathers. So I don't normally read, these are poems I don't normally read, but I thought I would. And this is, again, from my first collection, Flood. And it's called floriography, which, if you don't know, is the Victorian word for the language of flowers. Floriography. 1. Agapanthus. Our love flowered in a summer, died with grandparents, grew transcendent, open to what we could pour in. Cold, moss, dampness, bitter herbs, ethanol, dynamite, mouths open, our hands like trees clawing at sky. You had things to do, I suspected. I was tending the dead. When summer returned, we were quite changed. 2. Dill. Arriving, red-hot borscht, cold soup and sour cream, leaving, fermented. I say, go and see a doctor, check everything, get tested for diabetes, inflammation. I won't do it. I will travel to Poland on an overnight train, listen to Bob Dylan on headphones, eat miseria with hard-boiled eggs. 3. Forget-me-not. We stood in scorpion grass, a field of bullet mud somewhere in Somerset, listening to a band. We saw 500 species of human humming to the music. I can't remember anything. You were shot with a fire of root systems that germinated inside you. I was small and probably thinking, I would forget this moment. 4. Sweet pea. Like Odysseus, we have all been seduced by the wrong drugs in our wine, slept with the wrong people, blown by winds in the wrong direction, and somehow found our way back home. On our return, we find our genes mutated and poisoned, but our colours and stories intensified. 5. Pink carnation. I'm all yours in this budding place. I have flowers opening all over my skin. My internal organs abloom. No one cries petals like I do. You wave a rose like a red flag, and I'm kissing your eyes, which have turned away. I will keep them safe in my pocket. And I'll read for you the poem that is in that Blood Axe anthology that's just come out. I'm quite proud of that, so I'll read this out for you. Ursa Minor. 4,074 friends on Facebook. Pout perfect teenager stares at me through a silicon laptop. Just before her bud burst, she sent me a friend request. Status update. She dreamt a bear ate her last night. Poor Callisto, running to Forest Mother. Don't talk to strangers until you get there. In her dream, she lived in a house of glass, in the woods, seen by bears, seen by wolves. My urge to reply, fleshed with memories of the shock of being so new, so ripe. I typed, love eats us up. We're all animals in moonlight. Callisto, LOL, smiley face, heart. Don't go into the woods to be torn apart. Outside he watches her, clicks on her posts, likes her pictures of new hairstyles, picnics, drinks with friends. A gust of hot breath on glass, broken screen, bite marks. And just a couple of short poems now. This one is, again, published in Molly Bloom. Ghosts. I must write prayers for the dead today, as she looks around her and sees only 3 children. She says there's another one somewhere, knocking on the outline of a womb. She says, write me a prayer. I can't write prayers for the dead these days. They're knocking on my door with a wild streak, a sugar rush of urgency. I'm opening up, unbolting, unlocking the doors, fumbling for the keys. It's a thin time. A skin is bursting and I'm scratching my feet and want to barefoot into the garden where my mother keeps looking for a child she lost. Come inside, I whisper to her. But I'm angry. I won't write her a prayer for the dead. I make demands. Feed her sugared almonds, fatten her with cow's milk, try to change her. Must I write these prayers to a child that doesn't exist? She doesn't look into my eyes, glazed, distracted by a barking dog. I don't think the dead are far away, she says. I am a ghost dressed like a person. Won't someone write me a prayer that I might appear? And this, I wrote this poem in Siena when all going to lots of sort of stuff about saints and the bonkersness of them. This is called The Bride. There are leaves growing, bulbous and fragmented inside my mirror. Mother keeps 2 jars of bitter herbs on her dresser, pennyroyal and Queen Anne's lace. Just in case, she says. She saw me awake that night, her breasts uncovered. Remember when you were a girl, she whispered, when Jesus came to you that night, told you to hold him in your hands until you glistened with pearls. There is nothing left in the mirror, no fear left. I have disappeared into my cells. For God's sake, eat something, my mother screams at me, while I smile, transfigured. This poem is called Beast. There was so much hair. It clogged plug holes. She was forever combing and brushing his arms, back, neck. When he left for work, she set about brushing bits of his coarse lint from the backs of chairs. Every day, she swept up more bits of him, large brittle black toenails, flakes of scalp skin. On his return, she watched him slaver over the roast pork she made for him, leaving his saliva resting on plates. In secret, she collected his debris, made candles from his earwax, bottled him up, spun his fur into balls of wool, created a museum of his natural history, kept jars of him in the pantry, helped him to let the world believe he was a man. And just my last, I think the last 2, I think I'm on now. This is, again, a very new poem. This is The Wishing Well. A calculus of charges, she goes, neither man nor woman, neither god, nymph or metaphor, a seeping dip of blips in semaphore of sips, one drip at a time into iron red rock in a bed of ungiving earth. It looks like blood when she creeps out, tastes of pennies, a suck of money in its mouth. She said, take this honey, place a god on it, say a prayer, trick it from a spoon and think of him. That sweet earth, how do you take it in? I listened to her, watched her spells work on others, and watched my body lose water content, disappear into underground rocks. I tasted salt, become careful, careful down those 72 stone steps, down to the outflow, the wind-blown stone shapes. I could float in a rock bath, where the men in frock coats soaked to relieve their stained pricks, and the women drank to shrink their desires. Carve me into these cliffs. They lost the folklore here, but the fae have never left. Hair twitch, fire eyes. She darts her blood through the knotted earth, and the hen is the god of springs, laying eggs into ground. Water, yolk is run off. It's albumin, all protein of blood. Words become bodies, churn them out, keep birthing, push back up out of soil, out of my mouth. Shall I stop there? Or have I got time for one more? One more. Okay. I'll end with this one. This is about the fact that I don't know any names of plants. Very, very bad at that. This is called Naming Things. There was a famous naturalist who, returning from South America, told how every time he looked, he found a new species of moss, beetle, flower. He said it must be how God felt. I name you this and this and this. As I stroll up the banks of this English hill and pass well-trodden manicured paths lined with plants whose names I never learnt, I find a rhododendron tree. I hold my breath and climb inside. Stroking its sharp-tipped leaves, I ask it what its name really is. It laughs in sounds heard only by bees and whispers it. If you utter the true names of plants, you will stay forever at that place. Your mouth will turn to fibrous bark, and your eyes will fill with knots and birds. Your hair will rustle in the wind, alive with leaves and creeping woody things.
Thanks, Jess. Lovely. Very different hearing you in this, although at distance, intimate way rather than in a big room, but lovely. So, moving on, Alan Baker, whose long residence in Nottingham has done little or nothing to disguise his Tyneside roots, is a poet who for the past 20 years has gone quietly about the business of building up a body of always readable and thought-provoking work. Perhaps the most highly praised of his dozen books and pamphlets have been the relatively recent River Run, a philosophical amble along the Trent and through history, published last year by Knives, Forks and Spoons. And before that, the Red Ceilings Press pamphlet Letters from the Underworld, a kind of Dante in the 21st century, presented as a series of prose poems. I would also recommend his slim but highly varied latest publication, A Journal of Enlightened Panic. That title alone must surely deserve some sort of prize for capturing the zeitgeist. Alan is also a small press publisher of excellent taste. His Leaf Press, having produced work by Kelvin Corcoran, Carrietta, Geraldine Monk and Lee Harwood, all of whom have also been in Molly Bloom, and two of whom at least I think are listening to this now. In fact, he can take some credit for Molly Bloom's continued existence, having set about persuading me years before I'd ever met him in person to resurrect the long defunct title as an online magazine. It seems only appropriate then that I should now welcome Alan Baker, whose distinctive voice you will already have enjoyed if you were listening earlier this year to Molly Bloom 21. And yes, I do mean listening, because we are capable as an online magazine of having voices as well as words on the text, words on the page. So anyway, without more ado, over to you, Alan Baker.
Thank you, Aidan, for that introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here and read alongside Jess and Nancy. I kind of wish this was a face-to-face reading, because there are a number of people here who I've never met, but I'd very much like to meet. And there's also several people who I haven't seen for a long time. So anyway, hello to all of you. Okay, the first poem I'm going to read tonight is not by me. It's by one of my all-time favorite poets. It's a very short poem with a very few words, but it's one that I've lived with for many years, and it never lost its magic. It's called The Term, and it's by William Carlos Williams. A rumpled sheet of brown paper, about the length and apparent bulk of a man, was rolling with the wind slowly over and over in the street, as a car drove down upon it and crushed it to the ground. Unlike a man, it rose again, rolling with the wind over and over, to be as it was before. The next two poems I'm going to read are in Tyneside dialect, and Aidan and I both have a connection to the Northeast, and these poems were first published in Molly Bloom recently. They are in the form of Twitter sonnets, so they're the 280 characters of a tweet split over the 14 lines of a sonnet. But that's kind of irrelevant, because you're not going to read them, you're going to hear them. And the first one I'm going to read is called Charlie Carr Speaks. So Charlie Carr was a real person. He was a welder at Swan Hunter Shipyard on the Tyne, and he was our next door neighbour. And the poem is dated 1977. That's the year the shipbuilding industry was nationalised in Britain. And a couple of years later, Margaret Thatcher came to power. So, Charlie Carr speaks. Digging Hathaway and shite, a lot of them. They're war shipyards now. We sweated to build them ships. Prouder than how we are. Me father, his father, worked for nought. And now we'll get what we deserve. The fruits of our labours. I didn't blame his son for leaving Toon and getting an education. The second poem is called The Old Gadget of the Young Barman. A gadget is kind of originally meant a night watchman, but it came to mean any old man. And it's also dated in 1977, when I was in fact a young barman. Are you courting yet, son? Lassies? You didn't want to bother there, man. I never did. Well, yeah, man. I'm knocking on a bit now, but I still like the laddies. Aye, a bonny lad like ye. I've never told anyone before. Oh, Christ, didn't tell the lads in here, will you? I didn't know what they'd do. I'm just going to read one more. I was only going to read two, but I must read this one. So this one is dated 1967, when I was just a child. And it's called Where's It All Gonna End? Yee, I didn't Baker, look like butter wouldn't melt in your mouth. You're a bonny Ben, but you're no but trouble. I'll be having words with your mam. You'll never come out. Do you even belong round here? How do we all call it police? Where's it all gonna end? Years I was in a bloody book. So in the words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. The poems I'm going to read next are from this little booklet here, which is published by Red Ceilings Press, a beautiful little edition. You can see it's got one of Gustave Doré's engravings for Dante's Inferno on the cover. It's called Letters from the Underworld, and the title tells you all you need to know. Series of letters from an underworld which closely resembles this world. So this is letter number 14. In former times, we wandered wide in search of pasture, setting out each morning into the green hills, such freedom. Do you remember the old footpaths and drovers' tracks when wandering was a pleasure? But the strangers who arrive by night tell a different story. They take detours through underground caverns, follow their GPS through deprived areas of provincial cities, or denied access to places of safety, sleep in bus stations where the stars are erased. I sometimes think that each human life is like a molecular collision, unimaginably small, but affecting everything. The star clusters climb, Cassiopeia at the zenith, the vast galaxy of Andromeda a smudge on the black expanse. Oh, presences, crystalline and cold, bring clarity and care to our sunlit dealings. Be counterpoint to and escape from the acts of day. Be the comforting dark in which we sleep. To see the stars again, said Dante. I know what he means. Bonsoir, arrivederci, good night in every language that you know. I'm going to read another letter. Nothing more I need to say to introduce them really, but this is letter number 16. There are 20 letters in total. From where I'm sitting at my writing desk, the cry of the wanderers can be heard from the reserves. Some say it is haunting and beautiful, a melody of ancient sorrows. To others, it's an easy lament. The ferry operators say we have to be vigilant against such appeals to shallow, uncomplicated emotions at the expense of reason. They train their telescopes on the distant blue. If only foreign languages had been one of my core competencies, I could have interpreted these songs from the cradle of civilization and the Great Rift Valley. But the days are getting shorter and the heathland turns brown, then red, a skein of ice on the marsh, portent and harbinger of the change to come. It's nice at this season of the year to have a safe suburban home. Across the flats of the delta, the sea stirs in a passionless dawn. Could you teach me such calm, such perfect harmony with the world as I know it? Or is such stillness lost forever? Right, I'm now going to read some poems from this collection, which is called River Run. As Aidan says, it's a sequence of sonnets about the River Trent, so it's modernist sonnets. There are 64 of them, and yeah, I'll read them and then say a few words about. Well, I suppose what I want to say is when I was writing this, I mean, lots of people have written sequences about rivers. And if you compare this to something like Alice Oswald's poems about the River Dart, for example, which I have a huge admiration for, what she seemed to be doing there was almost like a kind of voiceover for a documentary about the river, sort of pointing you to the river. Whereas what I wanted to do in these poems was to create a version of the river in language. Yeah, so anyway, that's what I tried to do. So the first poem I'm going to read is the second one in the sequence. How to describe a kingfisher in flight? It was turquoise green with a flash of orange red as it banked to change direction, etc., knowing it was an idea of a kingfisher. That it was part of the brook, the alders, the fish it would catch, the person watching and now describing. It was colour, and I walk, headphones off, listening to the leaves speaking in tongues of the river that lives in every cell, laying claim to the world and everything in it. None of these poems have titles or even numbers, so I'll just kind of, well, this is the one on page 20. Under our dreams, the river, behind our eyes, emerging from culvert, ditch, storm drain, overhang and silt, current and tidal bore, lisps boundaries as if nothing is easier than erosion or division. Prototype frontier, original sign of no entry, give us inspiration, amnesia, promises, and while you're at it, yield up the souls of the psychotic, the depressed, the simply desperate, the unutterably sad. We know they're dissolved in your urban soup. A number of kind of characters go in and out of these poems, mostly associated with Nottingham or Nottinghamshire. This one mentions George Green. So George Green was a mill boy in Nottingham, and you can still go and visit Green's Windmill in Nottingham. I believe he didn't go to school, didn't have any schooling, but he managed to become a world famous mathematician and a great hero of Albert Einstein. So that's the George Green in his poem. This is the poem on page 21. Surely this river is some kind of metaphor. Somewhere, as it circles Nottingham, its currents conceal the lost lanes of narrow marsh, the lament of Reform Act rioters hanged in the market square, the rattle of the loom in the hungry alleys. Its narrows allied the formulae of George Green, the paradigm of every self-taught mathematician and millboy, whispering his equations to perch and pike, freshwater crayfish, the infrequent otter, while the river basks in the sun. This is the poem on page 42. Crystallography tells us about the transformation of water in the shallows and reed beds into something slower, brittle and white, like land, the exterior even more mysterious, glitter, scud of ducks slithering, embryonic glacier or reminder of what's lost, wrapped in the silver warmth of the ice. Imaginary swallows dream the sands of an African south, under grey blue steel cloud moon black white river. Hey river, why so pedestrian? Swallower of dreams, what is it with you? The next poem mentions two characters. One is Lord Byron, who spent part of his adolescence in Nottinghamshire. He's claimed as a kind of Nottingham poet, although he didn't really have much to do with Nottingham, in truth. And the other one is Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher. He had nothing to do with the Trent, but he did have something to do with rivers, because he famously said, you cannot step into the same river twice. So they both make an appearance. The first two lines of the poem are just the names of freshwater fish. From bream and barbel, pike and gudgeon, chub, perch, roach and rudd, we glean a fishy taxonomy we can weave into our own words. A classification of ponds and wetlands, drumlins and alluvial clay, the Severn Trent catchment serving 7 million people, land of Midland suburbia, where Heraclitus and Lord Byron argue the toss in the Barton Ferry. Though the waters are always changing, the river stays the same, says H, though the other demurs, saying the river has wrong-footed him, and the noon sits under his eyelids, painting an ideal world in coloured ink. And the last one, I'll read this as the last one out of this book. It's the last poem in the collection, so appropriate. I thought I'd written the river, constructed its plot twists, composed its songs, its pathetic fallacies. I thought it was my invention, magnificent and brooding, skipping in summer. I thought I knew it, but now I understand that it was the river that invented me. I'm one of its characters, especially at night, when it drenches my sleep in watercress and mint, dreams me into the one morning of the year when the mayflies rise in the sun, takes me into their swarms, into the swallows' patternings and the animations of starlings, greets me with the timely intervention of renewal. Okay, I'm going to finish by reading a final poem, which is from this collection, which Aidan mentioned, just released a couple of months ago, A Journal of Enlightened Panic. And the poem I'm going to read is the first one in the collection. So you can see, I always find it interesting to know how poems are laid out on the page when I'm at a reading. So this one is, as you may be able to see, it's got long lines and it's 2 pages long. And it can be summarized, the content of the poem can be summarized by a couple of lines from later in the poem. It's the thoughts a man may encounter as he goes out on a Sunday morning, walking the park in the autumn of his life. So here it is. It's called When a Man Goes Out. When a man goes out on a Sunday morning among May month trees, maple, sycamore, rowan, oak, and sees the tarmac paths, the metal bench, the individual grass stalks and daisies, and realizes they're the same ones he saw 40 years ago, when, for a moment, the girl he was dating that evening, yesterday's football match, the angst about his own clothes and looks vanished, and what he could see was what he could see, singular, real, containing all the intervening years and empty of them. When a man goes out on such a morning, the weight of the world seems lighter than his footstep, and he feels alone with everyone who's known, and all the works of all his days enacted in a glance. And it becomes apparent that life is multifarious, to such a degree that any attempt to hedge it in words is doomed to let those words turn into a flood, overwhelming the park through which our man is walking, the streets and squares round about, covering everything in a reflective surface with hidden depth and containing things floating, sunk, dissolving and half submerged, even live things like fish, getting into our rooms, our gardens, covering everything with sediment and ooze, veiling the true shape of the place he lives his life in, leaving him to wonder, was that a car park? This a sports field? Is water what was once the shape of my life? He knows then that to walk out on such a morning, watching sparrows and starlings flit between trees and anthropogenic clouds haul their vapour from swelling seas, is to walk on a green planet in an age of diversified flora and fauna and read a handbook of delirium, a journal of enlightened panic, a ceremonial cry of birds expressing the wilderness inside our languages, like the lost particle that explains the laws of physics. The question of ecology is crucial, being prompted by noticing an aircraft leaving its trail of white across the blue, and may lead to further questions, such as why are fridges so noisy, and is their noise proportional to the destruction of the ecosphere that they and similar consumer devices, which keep me healthy and privileged enough to walk a well-maintained urban recreational space on a Sunday morning, might be inflicting? And to what degree am I culpable in this? And is it decadent to be concerned with a question relating to a sculpture exhibition that he saw yesterday? The question being, is the artist deconstructing the construction itself as she starts with sketches of the human face and progresses to what is human in rock, soil and stream and swaying autumn branch? And should the artist instead be considering whether soil, rock, stream and branch might be situated in us, a part of us, along with the stars whence our atoms ultimately come, and the debris of stars, which is our home and mother, and this municipal park, wherein our man is aimlessly but purposefully wandering? There are children in the park, on the green. Should they be given the grace to move in their own element? Whose children are they anyway? It's not enough to wish them well, as if God's in his heaven and the council of ministers will reach agreement. We need to step from the white of the page to the green, which is our home. All the wandering wears us out. Can we be home and hard-headed for a while? Can the Arctic be rescued from our greed? My greed, a man may think. Mine. He may say, I want the sparrow to catch its fly. I want my keyboard to implicate itself in all the depredation. Somewhere there are other worlds. Each of us has one and is one. We that are young shall never live so long. Let me raise the key and enter into a mode of celebration, if not triumphalism. I believe I'm worth it, although I never trust the voices that separate the inner from the outer, that sit at the threshold and ask for ID. The songs of summer, where are they? They're so dependable, but achingly lonely, so forget them and consider instead the thoughts a man may encounter as he goes out on a Sunday morning, walking the park in the autumn of his life. To stop the mind does not mean to stop the activities of the mind, he remembers reading. It means your mind pervades your whole body. The question of travel no longer arises, because after all, the world itself is traveling and going nowhere at the same time. And so a man may be transformed each morning, like the day's colours mirrored in the windows of a sleeping house. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Alan. That was fantastic. That last poem is one of my favourites that I've heard. Or oh, it's lovely to hear it. It was one of my favourites already on the page of recent times. Brilliant poem. Love it. And I saw Rick Hall there laughing and along at your Geordie ones earlier. So we move on. If I can just find Nancy and unmute her, or ask her to unmute. Like Jessica Mookherjee, who we heard earlier, Nancy Gaffield is now domiciled in Kent, having until recently taught creative writing at the University of Kent at Canterbury. I think until recently. Nancy, is that right? Yeah. Right. Nancy was born in America. She's lived in England for the past 30 years, and her 5 books of poetry have all been published here. The first of those, Tokaido Road, was awarded the 2011 Aldborough First Collection Prize and was nominated for a Forward Prize. The 5th, Meridian, which was published last year by Longbarrow Press, enacts very literally that interest in place, which I alluded to at the beginning of this evening. Following also her interest in long-form poetry, it derives from and partially describes or recreates a 270-mile walk she undertook in stages between 2015 and 2017 along the Greenwich Meridian Trail, mixing observation of landscape, people, and the political awareness, which I think is fundamental to all three of tonight's poets, as it is to Molly Bloom. Nancy's latest work, Wealden, to be published very soon by Longbarrow, with an accompanying CD, explores the consonance between nature, poetry, and electronic music. The music, composed by The Drift, which is Rob Percy, Amelia Fletcher, and Darren Pilcher, accompanies a performance of the poem, presumably on that CD. Tonight, unless she has something up her sleeve that I'm unaware of, we get to hear Nancy Gaffield's voice unaccompanied. Here she is.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely introduction to Aidan and the wonderful readings by Alan and Jess. I am going to read a section of Wealden, and I do have the music that I could accompany it to, but I haven't been able to work out how to do the timing, so it will be just my voice. So this particular poem is called Song of the Shingle. No words but these, syllabics of stones at Dungeness. First light protracts you like a bruise on the bank, pushed up from the sea, pushed up and driven by wind and wave, widdershins. New plant and animal forms followed by extinction events, loss of diversity. Broken boats, tangled rope, longshore drift, the great dying. Constant din of bulldozers moving stone to save the power station. Crosshatch of contrails, water pounding and rising, flocks of thrushes, fiddle and drum. There are changes in the North Atlantic oscillation. Peaks in carbon-14 detected in ice cores, tree rings, salt marsh. Choked sediment moving in opposite directions. Rib of wind and wave. Wildlife and human intertwine. Not silence, but constancy. An unpleasant hum. That time an approaching plane. The sound mirrors already obsolete before the war, and after a tourist attraction. Take nobody's word for it. They keep stum with a strange rhythm, stum. Work to the flow of water, not the mechanical beat. People innovate. First the wheel, then the nail. Hydraulic thrust, repeating, repeating. Papyrus followed by paper. Shift from stone to bronze to iron. Concrete failures. The sound mirrors keep stum. In the lagoon brine, our ancestors lull. Tendrils of plant or fungus. The arrival of Homo sapiens brought about megafauna extinction. Not silence, but constancy. The harmonium, breathing in, breathing out. Not enough time. The sky turns thick with pigeons coming home to roost. Our way of life means we have managed to delay the next ice age. What happened at Burroughs Pit? They gathered leeches here, an abundance of leeches amongst superfluous stones. Water keeps rising, loses its shape, stakes its claim. Old age equals the age of fish. Middle life, the age of reptiles. New life, the age of mammals. The cormorants swim low, skim the surface. So close, the green of their eyes, bound to the land and bound to leave it. Swim low, sweet chariot, stalk and dive, master the art of invisibility. Plan your next move. Laid pits, hashtag ruin porn. Sound mirrors marooned on a man-made isle. Images of nuclear wasteland where cormorants stretch their wings in winter sun. So that poem, I guess, I started about 1.5 years ago. So as Aidan mentioned, it's going to come out in October or November with Long Barrow. So now I'd like to read some newer work. Haven't tried any of these poems out on anybody yet, so you're the victims. So I started work on some poems which I hope will be a collection. I'm not in a hurry to finish them. I've written 10, and they're going to appear in the Golden Handcuffs Review in the next one. So they're called Extinction Diaries, and some of them are descriptions of actual species which have become extinct. Other poems are a different kind of almost diary entries, but I thought I would read 3 of these. And the first one is called Stellar's Sea Cow. In the shallows, ebb and flow, kelp ribbons wave with the tides, shoals of sea urchins, indispensable to sea otters in the frigid Arctic waters. Hummocks fringe the coast. The eye distorts the contour of ice floes, the cruelest wind. Stellar's ship, the St. Peter, ran aground and broke apart, stranding Stellar and some other men. Mud, moss, whalebone. And there, trawling the sands, a black shape with skin like bark, the sea cow he named. A man in a boat can move among them without danger, select the one he desires. When they came to cut up her body, her mate was still waiting. Her milk is very rich and sweet. The breasts, when boiled, a little harder than beef, with the odor of game, but mild. Stellar died in the Arctic, and all that remains of his creatures are the words he gave them: placid, loyal, delicious. The second one of these is called the Alabama pigtoe mussel. What was there to be seen? Slow-moving, brackish water, ripe with sows, oxbows, bayous of cypress gum, bottomland forests and submerged grass beds, the wail of the loon. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost done, a long, long way from home. The Alabama pigtoe mussel, brown, nondescript except for concentric circles. To count 100 was not unusual, each circle a year. Mussels are filter feeders, purifying the river, but also ingesting toxic pollution, industrial waste in the gravel, riffles of the streams. Extinct species, number 37. What is seen? The paper mill, the oil storage tanks, an industrial railroad. At Africatown, the people arrived on the schooner Clotilda in 1860, illegal cargo. The people were unloaded and dispersed. The ship scuttled and burned. At Africatown, the people and the mollusks are one, and the truth travels on the far-carrying cry of the loon. Dylan, my dog's having a nightmare. The Yangtze River dolphin. And yet listen to the water, This was the day when there were hundreds of combinations of clicks and whistles, the river brimming with the sounds of sonar, so finely tuned that they could locate each other and even individual fish, confident in their time, the slow passing of 20 million years. The river ran free, till one day a man appeared who said, humans must conquer nature, and the Baiji found themselves in a darker, louder world. Ships dragging lines of hooks, snagging and slashing the tender skin of their young. And the river seethed with foam laden with heavy metals and sewage. Oh, river of death. And a sequence of lakes and power stations, sedimentation turning the water turgid with plastic, carried by the river to the sea. In 50 years, the Baiji were gone. Rock, water, flesh, soil. We are all the river. We are all downstream, and nothing exists but love. So these poems, writing during, COVID, well, it was getting a little bit hard and dark. So I decided to sort of return to an activity which I really have always loved doing, and that is writing about art. And I'll read 3 poems. 2 of them are rather traditional. They're based, the first one is called The Visitation, and it's based on a painting by the Italian Renaissance painter Ghirlandaio. Perhaps you know it, it's a fairly well-known painting. The Visitation. As Ghirlandaio did it, Elizabeth, heavy with child, kneels at Mary's feet. The pale coral of her cloak refracts the Roman light, the pair framed by a classical arch, embossed with pearls and shells, and through the arch, the city of Rome, framed in ochre light. If she had any doubts, the old woman kept them to herself. This is where their unborn children meet, and with his sudden leap, Elizabeth knows. But if you were a passerby on that scene, you would see the country with vineyards and a spring in the hills above Jerusalem. You would see the likeness in their eyes, sharing a secret, not the figure of Salome foretelling of things to come in the palazzo of a Roman home. And the second one, this again is a very famous painting, The Baptism of Christ by Piero della Francesca. John pours water from a simple bowl, his eyes locked on the serene figure before him. Baptize me, and I will become what I must be. Piero's passion for precision is gripping. An arch and Christ's loincloth form part of a perfect circle. A line ascends from the pavement through Christ's foot to his navel, his folded hands, the sheltering dove above. Of repentance and the forgiveness of sins, I know nothing but this simple stream that licked the feet of the one without sin in San Sepolcro. The pale bark of the elm echoes the pale body of the man. The scent of saliva drifts over the stream, reflecting the hills sprinkled with olive and acacia. 3 impassive angels watch from under the elm tree. Next in line, a man takes off his shirt, ready for his turn, unaware of the slow violence to come. And behind him, the Byzantine priests see nothing special and walk calmly on. And I'll finish with a last poem, which is something I finished yesterday. And it's also written about a piece of art. In this case, it's an installation by a Polish artist named Katerina Kobro. I don't know how many of you know her, but I'm interested in sort of learning to write about abstract art. And this is a constructivist piece which is lost now. It only exists in photographic form, but it was made in 1928. And I've called it, I Wish You'd Say. I wish you'd say, if this is language, what language is it? A message enclosed in a bottle, tossed into a sea, choking in plastic, a black and white tower of brick and sandstone, the sound of shingle rattling the crenulated shoreline, mezzanine floors of slate, a room, but not as rooms used to be, steel beams with massive rivets, each floor linked by a spiral of concrete stairs. Note that pinpoint join where molecules and particles drag at the boundary, grappling to balance the mass of weight, the language of form in space. Vertical planes organized by rhythm, not mass, an infinite cascade of square roots, a perpetual vortex of fractions, form for utility's sake, which made me think of the 1950s telephone 500 series. Modular construction, Bakelite body, the white dial displays numbers and letters through the holes of a rotary finger wheel, available in any color as long as it's black. In spatial composition number 4, I see an archway of invisible whiteness underneath a pergola of primary color. Rotate it 180 degrees, and the arc morphs into a glyph. A small blue platform above an empty pool where weight is breath, plasticity, tension, where contour and color switch the void to negative space. That's it. Thank you very much for coming and for listening.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was lovely, of course. Knew it would be.
Okay.
If I ever wonder, and I do, of course, why I do this thing, editing a magazine and now arranging readings, then tonight's three poets have all, in your different ways, provided a splendid reminder. As I said at the start, varied, yes, but lovely to hear the voice behind the words on the page. So thanks to Jess, Alan and Nancy. There will be another of these Molly Bloom readings in a few weeks. Readers yet to be determined and indeed date, but there will be one, probably more than one. So do keep an eye on Molly Bloom or the Molly Bloom Facebook group, if you remember, for names and details. If you're not a member, you are welcome to join. You should also see there shortly a recording of tonight's reading, which I'll be putting up on YouTube in case you want to enjoy it again or pass it on to someone who missed it tonight. I have invited everybody to unmute if you want to, so you can have a little cacophony amongst yourselves for a moment if you like. Otherwise, lovely to, as ever with these things, very strange, but lovely to see lots of familiar faces, lots of people. It'd be lovely to go to the pub with afterwards. We can't do that, but thanks for coming.
Thank you, Aidan. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Aidan.
Thank you, Aidan.
All the readers.
Bye-bye, Aidan. Bye. Thank you for inviting me.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for
Jess.
the reading.
Thanks, Aidan.
Really enjoyable.